At 10:17 on Saturday morning, I found the empty garment bag hanging from the brass hook inside my childhood bedroom. The zipper was open, the padded hanger was gone, so was the midnight blue dress I had driven 4 hours to wear. For several seconds, I stood without moving. The room smelled like cedar, furniture polish, and the lavender sachets my mother kept inside every drawer. Outside the open window, folding tables scraped across the lawn as my uncles arranged them beneath the white reunion tents. Someone tested the speakers near the barn. A burst of old country music rolled across the property, then stopped. I touched the garment bag with 2 fingers. The embroidered label near the zipper read, Bellwether Atelier. The letters were small and silver. Most people would not recognize the name. My sister did. There was a cream envelope on the bed. Inside was a note in my mother's handwriting. Claire needed something appropriate. Please do not make today difficult. I checked the time again. 10:18. The Delaney family reunion photographs were scheduled for noon. Lunch started at 12:30. My grandmother's 95th birthday toast was at 2. I had been home for less than 20 minutes. I placed the note on the dresser and called my sister. She answered on the 5th ring. Music played behind her. I heard the low rush of a hairdryer and our cousin Maribel laughing. Claire said she was getting ready and asked what I needed. I said, my dress. There was a pause, not surprise, not confusion, only irritation that I had asked so quickly. Claire said Mom told her I had other options. I looked down at the small suitcase beside my feet. It contained 1 pair of flat sandals, underwear, a linen robe, toiletries, and the pale gray trousers I had worn during the drive. I said, I brought 1 dress. Claire exhaled. She said the reunion mattered more to her this year. She had not seen most of the family since the separation. Everyone would be looking at her. She could not walk into the photographs wearing something cheap. The dress had cost me $4,800. That was not why I cared. I had purchased it 11 months earlier after completing the largest restoration project of my career. For 19 weeks, I had worked on a damaged collection of hand-beaded evening gowns recovered from a flooded private estate. I had cleaned every glass bead with cotton swabs. I had rebuilt silk foundations that dissolved when touched. I had spent hundreds of hours beneath white conservation lights, repairing objects that careless people had assumed were ruined. When the project ended, the estate owner gave me a bonus. I used part of it to buy the bellwether dress. It was the first expensive garment I had ever bought, simply because I loved it. No client approval, no museum committee, no practical explanation. The dress was made from dark silk velvet that looked almost black indoors and deep blue under natural light. The neckline was square and clean. The sleeves ended just above the wrist. The skirt moved with weight instead of volume. It did not sparkle. It did not need to. I had shown it to Claire once during a video call. She had asked the price before she asked anything else. When I told her, she stared at me and said it must be nice to waste money on clothes when no one depended on me. At the time, her husband, Evan, had been earning twice my salary. I had closed my laptop without responding. Now she was wearing the dress. I said, take it off and put it back in the bag. Claire lowered her voice. She said she was already at Aunt Lenora's guest house. Her hair and makeup were almost finished. She had tailored the dress temporarily so it would fit her better. Nothing permanent, just pins and fashion tape. My fingers tightened around the phone. I asked where she had pinned it. Claire said the waist and the back seam. The back seam was cut on a narrow bias panel. Pulling it inward with safety pins could mark the velvet permanently. Fashion tape could lift the pile. Heat from a curling iron or steamer could flatten the surface. I asked whether she had steamed it. She said Maribel had, but only lightly. The room went very still around me. I had spent 14 years learning how fabric recorded every careless decision. Velvet remembered pressure. Silk remembered moisture. Old lace remembered hands. People did too. I said, Claire, that dress is not yours. She answered that it was only for a few hours. Then she added that I always looked fine in anything because I was thin. It was an old sentence in a new shape. Claire had used versions of it since we were teenagers. I could wear anything because I was thin. I did not need attention because I was naturally quiet. I did not need help because I was capable. I did not need the larger bedroom because I had moved away for college. I did not need our grandmother's pearl earrings because I never went anywhere important. Claire needed things. I could manage without them. She said she would return the dress after the photographs. I said no. She said everyone was already stressed and asked me not to create a scene. Then she ended the call. I remained beside the bed with the phone against my ear. The line was silent. Downstairs, my mother called my name. She sounded cheerful. I took one slow breath, then another. Panic was useful for about 5 seconds. After that, it only made your hands less precise. I zipped the empty garment bag. I folded my mother's note in half and put it in my handbag. Then I went downstairs. My mother stood in the kitchen slicing lemons into a glass pitcher. She wore a pale green dress and the pearl earrings Claire believed I had never wanted. There were trays of cornbread on every counter. 2 sheet cakes waited near the refrigerator. Through the back door, I could see 30 relatives moving across the grass beneath strings of white paper lanterns. Mom looked at my trousers. Her smile tightened. She said I had better start getting ready. I placed the empty garment bag over the back of a chair. She did not pretend not to understand. She put the knife down. Mom said Claire had been crying since sunrise. Evan had posted photographs with another woman 3 days earlier. Claire felt humiliated. She needed to look confident in front of the family. I said, "So you took my dress." Mom wiped lemon juice from her fingers. She said she had not taken it. She had allowed Claire to borrow it. I asked how she could lend something she did not own. Her mouth flattened. She said this was not the morning for technical language. Technical language. That was what my family called facts when facts became inconvenient. I was 34 years old. Claire was 31. Our mother still spoke about our belongings as if they were pieces from a shared childhood toy box. I asked why she had not called me. Mom said she knew I would say no. I nodded. There was nothing complicated about that answer. She had not asked because my answer would have interfered with what she had already decided. Mom picked up the knife again. She said I had plenty of beautiful clothing through my work. That was not true. I restored beautiful clothing. I documented it. I stabilized it. I packed it in acid-free tissue and returned it to people who could afford humidity-controlled closets. I did not wear it. Museum pieces were not costumes. Client garments were not perks. My mother knew this. I had explained it for years. She preferred the version where my job gave me access to endless luxury, because that version made taking my one expensive dress feel harmless. I said Claire had pinned and steamed it. Mom stopped slicing. For the first time, concern moved across her face. She asked whether it could be repaired. I said I did not know until I saw it. She said, "Then you can fix it." There it was again. I could manage. I looked through the kitchen window toward the old maple tree. My grandfather had built a wooden swing beneath it when Claire and I were children. The rope had been replaced twice, but the seat was the same. Our cousins' daughters were taking turns on it, their white shoes kicking above the grass. I had planned this weekend carefully. I had rearranged 2 client consultations. I had driven from Harrow City before dawn. I had brought a leather album containing restored photographs of my grandmother's wedding dress, a surprise gift for her birthday. I had wanted one uncomplicated day with my family. I said, "Mom, ask Claire to return the dress now." She stared at me. Then she said I was being cold, not loud, not selfish, cold. That word had followed me through every disagreement since I was 14. Claire could scream, cry, throw objects, stop speaking for weeks, and arrive late to every important event. She was emotional. I could state one clear boundary in a steady voice. I was cold. Mom said family mattered more than fabric. I said, then Claire should have had no trouble choosing family over fabric. She looked away. The refrigerator motor clicked on. I picked up the garment bag. Mom asked what I was doing. I said I was getting dressed. She glanced at my suitcase. I did not explain. I carried the empty bag upstairs, shut the bedroom door, and called a number I had never expected to use for a family reunion. The number belonged to Celeste Varro. Celeste was 72. She had silver hair cut bluntly beneath her jaw and a voice that could reduce a boardroom to silence without rising above conversational volume. For the past 3 years, I had been the lead textile conservator for her private collection. Her late wife, Annalise, had designed evening wear under the name Varro Lise between 1984 and 2003. The house had closed after Annalise became ill. The surviving garments were rare, meticulously documented, and almost never loaned outside formal exhibitions. Celeste lived 35 minutes from my mother's house. That was the hidden reason I had volunteered to attend the reunion this year, instead of asking the family to schedule around my work. On Monday morning, I was supposed to inspect 12 Varro Lise pieces that had been moved from Celeste's city residence to her rural archive. One of them was a black and gold column dress from the final collection. I had seen it once. I had never touched it without gloves. Celeste answered immediately. She said, "Nora, you are early." I told her I had arrived in Belmere and asked whether she was at the archive. She said she had been there since 8. I looked at my reflection in the dresser mirror. My hair was still tied in the low knot I wore while driving. There were faint shadows beneath my eyes. My gray trousers were creased across the hips from 4 hours in the car. I said I had an unusual request. Celeste waited. I explained what had happened in plain terms. My sister had taken my dress without permission. She was wearing it to our family reunion. I had no other formal clothing with me. I did not ask for the Varro Lise gown. That would have been inappropriate. I asked whether Celeste knew of a boutique nearby that might have something suitable available before noon. When I finished, she was silent for 3 seconds. Then she asked what size I wore. I told her. She said, "Come to the archive." I said I was not asking to borrow anything from the collection. She said she knew exactly what I was asking. She was answering a different question. I gripped the phone more tightly. Celeste said Annalise had made clothing to be worn. The archive protected her work from neglect, not from life. She had been reviewing the black and gold column dress that morning. The lining had already been replaced with conservation-approved silk. The structure was sound. The dress had been fitted originally to measurements almost identical to mine. I said it was insured for more than my annual salary. Celeste said considerably more. I closed my eyes. She said she would not lend it to someone she did not trust. Fortunately, she trusted me. I told her a family lawn with children and barbecue sauce was not a controlled environment. Celeste said neither was the opera staircase where Annalise first wore it in 1998. I almost laughed. It came out as a breath. Celeste asked whether I could arrive in 20 minutes. I said yes. She said to bring clean shoes and no body lotion. The call ended. I stood in the center of my childhood bedroom and looked at the empty garment bag. I could have driven home. I considered it. A quiet exit would have been simple. I could have collected the album for my grandmother, left it on the kitchen table, and returned to Harrow City before anyone sat down for lunch. But I had done that too many times. I had mistaken absence for peace. Whenever Claire took something, I withdrew. Whenever my mother dismissed me, I reduced my needs until no one could accuse me of having them. I did not want a confrontation. I also did not want to disappear. I changed into my linen robe, washed every trace of moisturizer from my arms and shoulders, and packed my flat sandals into a clean cotton tote. I brushed my hair until it fell smooth beneath my shoulder blades. When I went downstairs again, Mom was arranging mint leaves in the lemonade. She asked where I was going. I said I had an appointment. She looked at the robe beneath my coat. She said the photographs were in less than 2 hours. I said I knew. She asked whether I had called Claire again. I said no. Mom followed me into the hallway. She said she wanted one day without tension. I opened the front door. I said, "Then stop asking me to absorb all of it." She did not answer. I drove east along Hollow Ridge Road with the windows closed and the air conditioning low. The morning sun had burned through the clouds. Cornfields ran in straight green rows on both sides of the road. My hands stayed steady on the steering wheel. At 10:49, I turned through 2 iron gates marked only with the number 61. Celeste's archive looked like a stone carriage house from the outside. Inside, it contained climate controls, fire suppression systems, sealed storage rooms, and more than 600 garments. Celeste met me at the side entrance. She wore navy trousers, a white shirt, and red canvas shoes. Her eyes moved over my face once. She did not offer sympathy. That was one of the reasons I trusted her. She said, "Washroom first, then fitting room." I washed my hands and forearms with unscented soap. I removed my earrings, watch, and rings. Celeste handed me a pair of thin cotton gloves, then led me through the main storage room. The air smelled faintly of clean paper and cedar-free archival board. Rows of gray cabinets stood beneath cool ceiling lights. Each drawer was labeled with collection numbers rather than names. The fitting room was warmer. The dress waited on a padded form. Even after 3 years of working around museum-quality clothing, I stopped at the doorway. The gown was not simply black and gold. The foundation was black silk crepe, cut close through the body without clinging. Across it, narrow bands of hammered gold lame curved from the left shoulder to the right hip, then continued around the skirt in widening arcs. The gold was aged. Not dull, but softened. It held light like old coins beneath water. The neckline rose high in front and opened across the upper back. Small onyx beads had been sewn by hand along the seams. The sleeves were narrow and transparent, made from black silk mesh. It was elegant without asking permission. Celeste watched me. She said Annalise called it the last light. I knew the name from the catalog. The final Varolese collection had been shown in a converted train station. Only 16 garments were made. The last light had closed the presentation. It had never been sold. Annalise wore it twice. The last recorded insurance valuation was $185,000. Claire could never afford it. Neither could I. That fact did not make me feel triumphant. It made me careful. I told Celeste I could not wear it to make a point. She said, "Good. Clothing used only as a weapon becomes ugly very quickly." She walked around the form and checked the back closure. Then she said I could wear it because I needed a dress, because it fit, and because I had spent 3 years making sure Annalise's work survived. The point, if there was one, belonged to everyone else. We dressed slowly. I stepped into a clean silk slip first. Celeste lowered the gown over my raised arms while I kept my hands closed. The fabric settled with almost no weight. She fastened the interior waiststay, then the hooks, then the concealed zipper. The fit was exact through the shoulders and slightly loose at the waist. Celeste used 2 conservation-safe interior clips that did not pierce the fabric. I looked in the mirror. For a moment, I did not recognize myself. Not because the dress transformed me, because it did not. It did not make me look softer, younger, richer, or more desirable. It made me look precise. My posture straightened without instruction. The dark fabric sharpened the line of my shoulders. The gold bands followed my body like controlled motion. Celeste stood behind me. She said, "You look like someone who has stopped apologizing for taking up the correct amount of space." I looked at her reflection. I said I was only going to a family lunch. She said most history happens in rooms where people believe nothing important is occurring. She opened a drawer and removed a small black case. Inside were plain gold drop earrings, designed by Annalise to accompany the gown. I shook my head. Celeste closed the case. She said, "Sensible." My flat sandals were clean but too casual. Celeste found a pair of black satin shoes from her personal wardrobe. They were half a size large. She inserted heel cushions and had me walk 6 lengths of the room. At 11:24, she photographed the gown from the front, back, and sides for condition documentation. At 11:29, I signed a temporary loan agreement. At 11:33, Celeste placed a dark wool wrap around my shoulders and handed me a rigid travel cloak to protect the gown inside the car. She said to avoid children with frosting. I said I planned to avoid everyone with frosting. Before I left, she touched the edge of the gold lame near my shoulder. Her fingers remained there for less than a second. She said Annalise hated locked doors. Then she stepped back. I arrived at my mother's house at 11:57. Cars lined both sides of the gravel drive. The lawn was crowded with relatives I had not seen in years. Children ran between the tents carrying paper cups. Smoke from 3 grills drifted toward the barn. I parked near the side gate and removed the travel cloak inside the car. My pulse had remained steady all morning. It changed when I saw Claire. She stood beneath the maple tree in my midnight blue dress. She had altered the shape exactly as she described. The waist was pulled inward at the back. The skirt sat almost 2 inches higher on her because she was taller than I was. She had paired it with silver heels and a rhinestone belt that pressed into the velvet. My dress looked beautiful from a distance. From 20 feet away, I could already see where the steaming had flattened one sleeve. Claire turned toward our cousin's camera. She smiled. For one sharp second, anger rose through me so quickly that my vision narrowed. Then I noticed her hands. She kept smoothing the skirt. She was nervous. Not powerful, not victorious. Nervous. Evan's photographs with another woman had reached the entire family before Claire arrived. She believed my dress could protect her from their pity. It could not. No dress could. I stepped out of the car. The first person to see me was Uncle Raymond. He held a tray of hamburger buns against his stomach. His mouth opened, then closed. Aunt Lenora turned next. Then Maribel. Conversation did not stop all at once. It thinned in sections as people noticed me. I walked through the side gate. The silk crepe moved quietly around my ankles. Sunlight caught the worn gold bands. They did not glitter. They warmed. My mother came down the porch steps. She stared at the dress, then at my face. She asked where I had found it. I said it belonged to a client. Her eyes widened. She lowered her voice and asked whether I was allowed to wear it. I said yes. She looked toward Claire. My sister had stopped smiling. She stood beneath the tree with one hand against the rhinestone belt. I did not walk toward her. I went to my grandmother. Grandma Elise sat beneath the main tent in a wicker chair decorated with white ribbon. She wore a lavender suit and orthopedic shoes. A paper crown marked 95 rested crookedly over her silver curls. When she saw me, her face changed. Not because of the gown, because I was carrying the leather album. I bent carefully and kissed her cheek. She touched the cover with both hands. She asked whether those were her wedding photographs. I said I had restored every one I could find. Her fingers shook as she opened the first page. The original images had been faded and water damaged. In the restored versions, her satin dress appeared ivory again. My grandfather stood beside her at 22, narrow-shouldered and serious. Grandma stared for a long time. Then she placed one hand over mine. She said I had brought her back. I sat beside her. For 10 minutes, the reunion disappeared. Grandma pointed to people in the photographs and gave me names I had never heard. She remembered the florist who arrived late. She remembered sewing seed pearls onto her own veil at midnight. She remembered my grandfather stepping on the train of her dress during their first dance. She laughed until she coughed. I brought her water. By the time I looked up, Claire stood several feet away. Our mother was beside her. Claire's face was pale beneath her makeup. She asked whether she could speak to me inside. I said after the photographs. Her eyes moved down the Vero Lise gown. She knew clothing labels. She followed auction accounts. She could identify handbags from a blurred corner in a social media photograph. She did not know what I was wearing. That bothered her more than if she had recognized it. She asked what designer it was. I said Vero Lise. Her expression emptied. Maribel, standing behind her, whispered that the house had closed years ago. Claire looked at the gold bands again. She asked whether it was vintage. I said, 1998. She asked how much it cost. I said it was not for sale. Her jaw tightened. Then the photographer called everyone toward the barn. The family photograph had been planned in rows. Grandma Elise sat in the center. Her children stood behind her. Grandchildren and spouses filled the next rows. Great-grandchildren sat on blankets in front. Claire and I were placed beside each other. It was not my decision. The photographer waved us closer. Claire's bare arm touched my silk mesh sleeve. She flinched away as if the fabric could accuse her. The photographer asked everyone to look toward the camera. Claire whispered that I had done this on purpose. I kept my eyes forward. I said I came dressed for the reunion. She said I wanted to embarrass her. I said I had not taken anything from her. The photographer counted down from 3. The shutter clicked. In the final photograph, Claire is wearing my midnight blue dress. I am wearing the one she could never afford. Neither of us is smiling widely. Grandma Elise is laughing between us. After the photograph, Claire walked quickly toward the house. My mother followed. I remained near the barn while the photographer arranged smaller family groups. Several relatives asked about the gown. I answered plainly. It was a privately held Varo lease piece. It had been loaned with permission. I was responsible for its care. No one needed the valuation. Maribel found it anyway. She searched the designer on her phone and discovered an auction record for a less significant Varo Lis gown that sold for $92,000. The information moved through the reunion faster than the lemonade. I heard fragments, museum piece, private collection, one of 16, maybe 200,000. I did not confirm any of it. The price was not the story. The story was permission. My sister had worn something expensive because she believed wanting it entitled her to take it. I wore something beyond either of our means because someone trusted me to return it unharmed. Those were not the same kind of access. At 12:30, I carried my plate to a small table near Grandma Elise. I chose grilled chicken, green beans, and a roll without sauce. The gown remained protected beneath a large linen napkin while I ate. Celeste would have approved. My mother approached before I finished. She asked me to come inside. I said I was eating with Grandma. Mom looked around. 3 aunts watched us without pretending otherwise. She said Claire was upset. I cut a green bean in half. I said Claire had been upset before I arrived. Mom said I had made it worse. Grandma Elise closed the album on her lap. She looked at my mother and said, "Judith, leave the girl alone while she eats." My mother's face changed. At 62, she still became a daughter when Grandma used that tone. Mom said this was a private family matter. Grandma looked across the lawn toward Claire's empty chair. She said nothing stayed private after you wore it to a reunion photograph. I looked down at my plate to hide the brief movement at the corner of my mouth. Mom walked back toward the house. Grandma reopened the album. She pointed to a photograph of herself standing beside her younger sister. Her sister wore the veil Grandma had sewn. Grandma said. She asked before she borrowed it. That was all. At 1:15 I went inside, not because my mother had demanded it, because the heat was rising, and I wanted to check the gown beneath controlled light before the birthday toast. Claire sat at the kitchen table, wearing a white bathrobe. My midnight blue dress lay across 2 dining chairs. My mother stood near the sink. The rhinestone belt had been removed. A handful of safety pins rested in a saucer. Strips of used fashion tape had been stuck to a paper towel. I stopped in the doorway. Claire looked up. Her eyes were swollen. She said she had taken it off. I crossed the room and examined the dress without touching it. The velvet pile at the waist was crushed in 4 places. A narrow patch near the right shoulder looked lighter where steam had changed the nap direction. The interior back seam showed punctures from 2 safety pins. None of it was catastrophic. All of it was avoidable. I washed my hands at the sink and dried them on a clean cotton towel. Then I lifted the dress by its interior loops and carried it upstairs. My mother followed. She said Claire was sorry. I laid the dress flat on the bed. I said Claire had not told me that. Mom said she was too ashamed. I examined the neckline. A faint line of makeup marked the inside edge. I wrote each issue in the notes application on my phone. Mom watched me. She said I was treating my sister like a client claim. I said I was documenting damage. She said the dress could be repaired. I looked at her. I said yes. By me, again. The room was quiet. Mom sat on the edge of the desk chair. She said she had thought I would understand. I asked what she believed I would understand. She folded her hands. She said Claire had lost her marriage. She felt discarded. She had spent 3 days seeing strangers discuss Evan's new relationship online. She did not want to look pathetic in front of the family. I listened. All of that was true. Claire was hurt. Evan had behaved carelessly. Their marriage had ended badly. She had come home to a family that asked questions with their eyes, even when they kept their mouths shut. None of that made my dress hers. I said, "You could have helped her buy something." Mom said there had not been time. I said, "You could have called me." She looked toward the floor. I said, "You could have told her that looking hurt after being hurt was not pathetic." Mom pressed her lips together. She said Claire had always needed more reassurance than I did. I asked how she knew. She looked up. I said, "Did you ever ask? Or did I simply learn not to require it?" Her eyes filled. I did not feel victorious. I felt tired. Mom said she had never meant to make me feel less important. I said intention did not restore fabric. She flinched. The sentence was harder than I planned, but it was true. I softened my voice. I said this was not about choosing a dress over Claire. It was about everyone repeatedly choosing Claire's immediate feelings over my right to say no. Mom wiped beneath one eye. She said she did not know how to fix that. I said, "Start by not asking me to fix it for you." Downstairs, a chair scraped. Claire stood in the doorway. She had changed into a simple yellow cotton dress that belonged to our cousin Maribel. It fit loosely at the waist and ended below her knees. She looked younger without the heavy makeup and rhinestone belt. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then Claire said, "I should not have taken it." I waited. She looked at the bellwether dress on the bed. She said Mom told her where I kept it, but she was the one who opened the bag. She was the one who pinned it. She knew I would refuse, and she decided I would forgive her afterward. I said, "That is usually what happens." Claire nodded. Her face tightened. She said she had seen my car come through the gate. Then she saw the black and gold dress and thought I had planned the entire thing to make her look poor. I said I did not know she would take my dress when I packed yesterday. She said she knew that now. I asked what changed. Claire sat on the opposite edge of the bed, careful not to touch either gown. She said Maribel showed her the auction result. Everyone kept talking about how expensive my dress must be. Then Aunt Lenora told her the difference was that I had been trusted with mine. I looked toward the window. Aunt Lenora had understood faster than the rest of us. Claire twisted her fingers together. She said she hated me for about 10 minutes. I said I assumed so. She gave a small, exhausted laugh. Then she said she realized I had not walked around telling anyone the price. I had not even walked toward her when I arrived. I had gone directly to Grandma. I did not answer. Claire said she had wanted me to confront her in front of everyone because then she could call me cruel and stop feeling guilty. The honesty of that sentence surprised me. She looked at the blue velvet. She said when I did not confront her, she had to stand there wearing proof of what she had done. My mother began to speak. Claire raised one hand. She said, "Mom, please." Mom stopped. Claire told me she would pay for the restoration. I said professional velvet treatment could cost several $100s, possibly more if the pile did not respond. She swallowed. Then she said, "Send her the invoice." I asked whether she had money for it. She said she would make payments. I believed her, not because she sounded emotional, because she did not ask for a discount. I opened the closet and found the padded hanger that had been left on the floor. I covered it with clean tissue before placing the bellwether dress over it. Claire watched every step. She said she had always thought my work was just very careful dry cleaning. I looked at her. She said she understood how insulting that sounded. I told her to bring me the handheld steamer. Her face reddened. She retrieved it from the guest house and returned 5 minutes later. I photographed the model number and temperature setting. Then I placed it in the hallway so no one could accidentally use it again. At 1:40, the three of us went back outside. Claire wore the yellow cotton dress. No one stared at her as much as she feared. A few relatives glanced at the outfit change. Most were busy eating cake. Evan's photographs did not come up during Grandma's birthday toast. Uncle Raymond spoke about the time Grandma drove through a snowstorm to collect him from college. Aunt Lenora described the meals Grandma delivered after each baby was born. My mother read a short poem. Then Grandma asked me to stand beside her with the restored album. I did. The Varolese gown moved beneath the tent in bands of muted gold. Grandma held one of her wedding photographs against her chest. She said clothing lasted when someone cared for it, but photographs lasted when someone remembered the people inside them. I looked at Claire. She was listening. After the toast, Grandma asked us both to join her beneath the maple tree. Claire stood on her left, I stood on her right. The yellow dress fluttered in the breeze. My borrowed gown remained still and waited. Grandma took one of our hands in each of hers. She said she was too old to waste a good birthday refereeing. Claire smiled. I did too. Nothing was repaired in that moment. Not the velvet, not the years beneath it, but for once, no one pretended there had been no damage. That mattered. At 3 o'clock, I returned to the house to change. I did not keep the Varolese gown on for the rest of the afternoon. Wearing it longer than necessary would have turned responsibility into performance. I closed the bedroom door. I removed the borrowed shoes first, then the internal waist clips. I unfastened the gown slowly and stepped out without allowing the hem to touch the floor. I checked the silk mesh for pulls. None. I checked the lame bands for food, moisture, and pressure marks. None. I checked the onyx seams. Intact. I put on my gray trousers and a clean white blouse borrowed from my mother's closet. When I carried the protected gown downstairs, Claire stood in the hallway. She offered to help. I said no. Her face fell. I added, not because I am angry, because this requires training. She nodded. That distinction seemed important to both of us. She opened the front door while I carried the gown to my car. Before I lowered it across the back seat, she asked what it was worth. I told her the last valuation. $185,000. Claire stared at the travel cloak, then she looked at me. She said, "You wore a $185,000 dress to eat grilled chicken from a paper plate." I said carefully. She laughed. The sound was short and real. Then she looked back toward the house. She said my blue dress had made her feel safe for about 15 minutes. I waited. She said after that, it made her feel like a thief. I said, "You are not a thief." She looked at me sharply. I said, "You took something. Those are not the same sentence unless you keep doing it." Her eyes filled again. She nodded. Before I left, Claire transferred $200 to me as the first payment toward the restoration. The notification appeared on my phone while we stood beside the car. No speech, no promise that everything would be different, just the first payment. I drove back to Celeste's archive at 3:38. She met me in the fitting room. Together, we completed the condition report. The gown had survived the reunion without change. Celeste inspected the hem beneath magnification. She checked the mesh sleeves, the waist stay, and every section of gold lame. Then she signed the return line. I released a breath I had been holding since noon. Celeste looked at me. She asked whether my sister admired the dress. I said she admired the price first. Celeste made a quiet sound of disapproval. I said she understood more by the end. Celeste covered the gown with unbleached muslin. She said expensive objects often revealed inexpensive thinking. I asked whether Annalise had said that. Celeste said no. Annalise would have said it with better grammar. We stored the last light in its assigned cabinet. Before I left, Celeste handed me a flat archival box. Inside was a simple black silk dress with a narrow V-neck and cap sleeves. It was modern, unregistered, and clearly unworn. I looked at her. She said it was not part of the collection. She had ordered it months earlier, disliked the sleeves, and missed the return deadline. I checked the label. It was from a small, independent designer and likely cost more than my monthly rent. I closed the box. I said I could not accept it. Celeste said then I could buy it from her for $1, because legal clarity comforted me. I smiled. She held out her hand. I found a dollar bill in my wallet. We completed the transaction. The next morning, I began treating my bellwether dress at my mother's dining room table. I placed a clean cotton sheet beneath it. I used low suction through a protective screen to lift the crushed velvet pile. I tested the shoulder area with controlled humidity. I documented every change in photographs. Claire sat across from me. She did not touch anything. She made coffee and kept it on the kitchen counter, far from the fabric. For 2 hours she watched me work. At 11:15, the waist marks had softened. The shoulder would require more treatment in my studio. The safety pin punctures might always remain visible beneath magnification, but the seam was structurally sound. Claire asked whether I could still wear it. I said yes. She looked relieved. Then I said that was not the same as saying nothing happened. She nodded. Mom stood in the doorway. She had been listening. She said breakfast was ready whenever we wanted it. She did not tell me to stop working. She did not say the damage was small. She did not ask me to reassure Claire. It was a beginning measured in what she did not say. I returned to Harrow City that afternoon. The reunion photograph arrived by email 2 weeks later. I opened it at my studio desk beneath a white task lamp. Grandma Elise sat in the center wearing her paper crown. My mother stood behind her. Claire stood beside me in my midnight blue dress. The velvet looked almost black in the shaded photograph. Her silver belt caught the flash. She looked composed until I enlarged the image and saw her fingers gripping the skirt. Beside her, I wore the last light. The gold bands crossed my body in quiet arcs. The dress looked older than both of us and more certain. Anyone seeing the photograph without context might assume the important difference was money. It was not. Claire had worn the dress I could afford because she believed my ownership was negotiable. I had arrived in the one she could never afford because trust had given me access that money could not. 3 months later, Claire completed the restoration payments. She never asked me to forgive the remaining balance. My mother began calling before offering my time, my work, or my belongings to anyone else. Sometimes she still started a sentence with, "Claire needs." Then she stopped and corrected herself. She said, Claire asked. That difference was small enough that no one outside our family would notice. I noticed. At Christmas, Claire gave me a new padded garment bag. It was made from breathable cotton and had reinforced interior loops. She had researched it herself. Inside the pocket was a handwritten card. It said only, "This one stays closed unless you open it." I still have the card. I also still have the bellwether dress. The shoulder recovered, the waist marks lifted, the back seam holds. Under magnification, I can find the 2 tiny pinholes. I do not hide them. The following spring, I wore the dress to Grandma Elise's 96th birthday dinner. Claire arrived in a red dress she had bought on sale and altered herself. Before dinner, she asked me to check the hem. I knelt, examined the stitching, and told her it was even. She smiled. Then she asked whether she could borrow my lint brush. I handed it to her. She returned it before we left the house. The family reunion photograph now sits in a silver frame on Grandma's mantel. Whenever afternoon light crosses the room, it catches the gold bands on the Varolise gown and the rhinestone belt around my blue velvet dress. Both shine. Only one was borrowed with permission. And every time I look at that photograph, I remember the empty garment bag, my mother's note, and the exact moment I decided I would no longer disappear simply because someone else had taken my place.